Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I'm very unhappy with the education I received. I have a distorted view of the world.
I'm 25 now, and my level of education is just like a 9-year-old, 10-year-old.
This is one of Britain's quietest and most private communities. Yet, despite keeping itself to itself, it's getting unwanted attention from government. 30,000 Charedi Jews, followers of a variety of strict orthodox traditions, live around here in Stamford Hill in Hackney, London. The authorities are worried about some of their private boys' schools, which, contrary to the law, are not registered. Current and former community members estimate there are between a dozen and 20 significantly sized illegal schools that are uninspected and offer a narrow syllabus, teaching up to 1,000 boys.
Now, one of the oldest principles about how England regulates its schools is that parents should have the right to educate their own children according to their own faith or culture. A second principle, though, is that no child should be given an education so narrow that they can't do what they'd like to do in adulthood. And sometimes in religious communities, whether they be Muslim, Christian, or here in Stamford Hill, Jewish, those principles clash.
We met several former pupils who have left the community and feel their education in the illegal schools was very poor. They're anonymous because their families would be upset by their participation in this report. Despite growing up in London, English is a second language to these men. Their words are spoken by actors with similar accents.
Basically, just imagine a school of like 200, 300 years ago. It's just the same thing.
We spoke in Yiddish. We only used Yiddish at home and at school. I feel my whole childhood has been taken away from me.
Haredi parents tend to educate their girls in relatively mainstream schools, but lots want a religious education in Yiddish for their boys. They want a primary education before the age of 13 with only an hour or so of secular study each day, the rest spent in scriptural study.
We weren't taught any geography, because why? If we stay in this enclave all of our lives, why do we need to know geography? We weren't taught any science. Any other subjects other than English and math we weren't taught at all. But even English and math was only the very, very minimum for a few days a week.
After the age of 13 or so, some parents want an almost exclusively religious education in so-called yeshivas for their boys. Now, some of these schools are registered, but community members defend the right of schools to remain unregistered. They fear the authorities won't respect their curriculum choices, so they are hidden. The authorities are dedicated to closing these illegal schools down, but still, we found them pretty easily.
So it's late morning now, we're here in Stamford Hill. We've been here since about 6 a.m. and we've been doing roughly what the council does when they hear a report of a suspected illegal school. They turn up and they watch to see if young boys are turning up for an education. And sure enough, between about 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. this morning, we saw boys turn up for their school day at around 4 sites around Stamford Hill, none of whom are registered with the Department for Education as schools.
We've since found that whistleblowers have notified the DFE about all 4 of those schools, but we learned when they investigated one of them, they found only adults learning there. So, to check on what we saw, we got a Yiddish speaker to ring that unregistered yeshiva, posing as the parent of a 13-year-old boy.
Hello.
Our caller asked when the school day started.
We begin the day at morning prayer. However, there's probably a dawn framework for those who want to come in early.
And those who want to come, from when do they start?
I don't know. I'm not here in the morning, so I don't know.
So when is morning prayer? 8:30?
Morning prayer is 8 a.m, I think.
And then in the evening, are the students there around until 9 p.m?
Which age group? Year B?
Indeed, Year B, the 14-year-olds.
Year B until 9 p.m, maybe until 10 p.m.
How many boys are there in your yeshiva?
How many? The junior yeshiva is reasonably big nowadays. 90 students. Around 80, 90 students.
When asked what was on the syllabus, the school listed no secular subjects. And there's only one place that this school was registered, with the Charity Commission. So they get tax advantages, something that the British Humanist Association found in other cases too.
By being allowed to register as charities, these schools are being given access to all sorts of tax and other financial benefits that supplements the hundreds of thousands of pounds of money that is pouring into them. That means that this is not just a matter for the Department for Education in some regulatory sense to sort out, it also is a serious matter for the Charity Commission to investigate.
We've been asked not to reveal the schools' locations by experts on anti-Semitism. Being unregistered puts these schools outside child protection processes or normal health and safety oversight. The school we rang up is actually housed in a building that failed a fire brigade fire safety inspection last year. The critical question, however, is about whether parents should be able to ask for such a narrow education for their own children.
I'm angry, but the thing is, I don't really know who to address that anger at, because my parents were brainwashed to live like this. I can't really blame them. They believe that this is the lifestyle they need to live. So they didn't do it to harm me, so I can't hate them for that. But of course I'm angry, yeah. I mean, why do I need at this age to do things that I should have done 10 years ago, 15 years ago? I'm just wasting time. It's stopping me from getting opportunities someone else my age can get, just cause I got no qualifications, and that's why I'm actually struggling now with my job.
Their parents and teachers gave them a highly intellectual, very, very sophisticated education for the life that they planned for them to lead. Now they've rejected all that and they've gone off into the world outside, so they have to start again. They have to acquire an education that suits the world outside.
And this head teacher of a registered Haredi school feels his education was excellent.
My experience of yeshiva, whilst it was unregistered, was overwhelmingly positive. I attended yeshiva from the age of 14, and I spent the majority of the day studying biblical and Talmudical texts. Now, you should know that biblical and Talmudical studies are very challenging and highly intellectual. I feel, and I know, that when I went, the days that I've spent in yeshiva and the years that I've spent, I've gained the vital skills of logical reasoning, critical thinking. The yeshiva has put a great emphasis on building confidence through public speaking or leading prayers.
Now, defenders of the community insist that boys can retrain for life outside Stamford Hill if that's what they want.
So I spent a lot of time learning equations about the balls rolling off tables and things like that for physics. Would a child in
Have you ever used that since you left school?
Not very much, no.
No, well there you are.
But it's
and you're a successful journalist and television reporter.
Yeah, but if I'd wanted to go and study physics at university, I'd have needed that.
Yes, but you didn't know that until you made your decision about what career you were going to follow.
Yes, but I had the option of going to study physics at university because I'd done that at school.
All Jewish children have the option of studying any subject they want to. When you're talking about an adult of 17, 18, 19, then the parents have no control over the child. The child, or the adult, the young adult, makes his own decision about what he's going to study.
The head teacher also thinks that the Haredi primaries have been getting better, which is the key to solving these problems.
They were let down in a primary school system, or up until the age of year 9, where the provision of secular studies was not good enough. And as I said, we are currently doing a huge amount to actually improve the standards of secular education, and I'm not convinced that a fundamental change to the structure of our education system is necessary.
These schools are unlike the many mainstream Jewish faith schools across England which offer a broad curriculum. But lots of Haredi parents use illegal schools precisely because they don't want a broad curriculum. And they fear that if the illegal schools were to register, they would need to become less specialised, or even forced to close by the Department for Education.
Well, we're joined now by Jonathan Arkush, the President of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. But first, Chris Cook is here. Chris, you've got statements from various bodies after that film.
That's right. This is, first of all, starting with the Department for Education, which is the sort of ultimate regulator of the whole system.
Who wouldn't put an interview up?
Yeah, sorry, I think not entirely unfairly. They say that unregistered schools are illegal and unsafe, and we are taking unprecedented and direct action against them across the board to protect children. They sound very similar to the Ofsted statement, who note that in January 2016, with the support of the Secretary of State, Ofsted established a new task force to identify, inspect and investigate unregistered schools, and note that since November last year, the Chief Inspector has commissioned the inspection of 8 unregistered schools, 7 of which they've closed. The Charity Commission, who obviously make an appearance in there because the schools have charitable status, says that charities must not only comply with the charity rules, but any other regulators' rules, and they will assess any information and liaise with the Department for Education if necessary to determine if they need to take any action.
Thank you. Jonathan Arkush, what do you make of Chris' film?
It was a fair film. It highlighted how some of these schools are operating in an illegal environment where there present terrible health and safety fears to the children, and I don't condone any law breaking.
Why do you think that quite a substantial number of Haredi parents take this step of sending their children to unregistered schools?
Because they actually want the children to have what is a curriculum which to the mainstream part of the Jewish community and most people in this country appears very restricted and narrow, because they're taught what the parents believe to be essential Jewish values, and given what they regard to be the priorities of an intensive Jewish education in biblical texts. And I think it's fair to make this point. The schools are socially conservative. They're not extremist. No child from these schools will ever come out and do any violent act. They're respectful children, and they're well-mannered children.
But they're not children prepared for the outside world. You heard that young man saying that, you know, he had the education of a 10 or 11-year-old. Do you think that parents have the right to prevent their children from having a rounded education?
I think parents need to comply with the law, which should be upheld, which is that there should be a national curriculum which prepares children of all faiths for life in the outside world.
Because, of course, there are Haredi schools which are registered and do comply with the curriculum.
Indeed, the great majority of Haredi schools are high-performing schools. So you're talking here of a very, very small, narrow fringe of schools. Fortunately,
but it's 1,000 children, unfortunately.
Well, that's an estimate. There could easily be a number of hundreds of children at these schools.
Why do you think that neither Ofsted nor the Department of Education, who know, according to Chris, that these illegal schools exist, simply do not go in to these condemnable buildings and shut them now?
Of course, if you did shut them now, what happens to all the children? Where do they go? There aren't necessarily the places in other schools in Hackney for them to go to. I think a better policy must be for the public bodies to work with the communities, work with the schools, as we saw from your report of that headmaster, show the communities there's a better way forward. We've been into many Haredi schools and discussed with them difficult subjects which they haven't yet been prepared to look at and work out how to convey to the children. And there's huge amounts of really good practice going on there. It has to be a sensitive discussion to bring these schools forward rather than drive them somewhere underground.
Do you think that the approach of Ofsted then towards faith schools is wanting when it comes to Haredi schools?
I think it is. I don't think there's been a clear understanding of the community's traditions and values, and they've gone in rather heavy-handed. And it's not only Haredi schools, Catholic schools, Christian schools, faith schools, other Jewish schools. We've had inspectors going into primary schools and asking young children whether they have boys and girlfriends. And these children don't even understand the question at that age. All sorts of cultural assumptions are being made by the Ofsted inspectors without much sensitivity to the cultural background and traditions of the communities.
But I am interested in the idea that for parents, and you know, you heard the Huddersfield professor saying there, well, it really, you know, they can get an education after. that actually, especially in society the way it is today, with jobs and so forth, it's virtually impossible to go from being an educated 9 or 10-year-old when you're 25 to suddenly getting perhaps a job in, I don't know, in the steel industry and physics, and it means that a lot of life is not open to them.
Well, you'd be surprised actually how quickly children who may have had a particularly narrow education till the age of 16, after which they can learn whatever they like or not like, can quickly adapt. But yes, I agree with you. I think it's really important that all our children should be prepared for the life outside.
Jonathan Arkush, thank you very much indeed.
I've been getting away